Okay. So, so before OHBM, OHBM started as you know, in the Paris meeting, but there was a time before OHBM, the pre-OHBM era, and that was pretty much consisted of a number of different meetings. And one of the main meetings at the time was a brain map meeting that was originated by Peter Fox. And he'll start out by talking about that era. And there'll be a few pictures up there. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for that. And thank you all for coming. All right. So this is about time before time actually began. And so in there we go. In the early 90s, Jack Lancaster and I had been working on the Brain Map project. And for those of you who aren't familiar, that's entirely about data sharing. And at the time, we were working with something that was pretty radical. I got yelled at a lot of meetings, mostly clinical. We were working in standardized space. And I got told 1,000 times that if you want to know where you are in the brain, you ask a neuroradiologist, and that's the right way to do it. And what we were doing was wrong because all people are different from all other people. The other thing we were doing, which was pretty radical, was we were doing voxel-wise whole brain analyses instead of ROIs, and the PET crowd thought that that was wrong, that you take ROIs and you do time activity curves, and so everything we were doing was wrong. So basically, to promote this notion more and to get input and community buy-in, we held a series of meetings in San Antonio, and these were funded by initially the Office of Naval Research. So we had money and invited people to come meet with us. And so if you look, there's Steve Peterson and Cheryl Grady and Leslie Ungerleider and Arthur Toga, the Marcel Mejelam, Rudiger Seitz, let's see, Per Roland is there, Bernard is here, looking exactly the same, Alan Evans is here, Pat Goldman-Rakish, Ryuta Kawashima, and back there, David Van Essen, and we've got Carl Friston, when he was the very young investigator before he got the Young Investigator Award. So not old enough yet for that. And we brought in people from other communities. Brian McWhinney had released a database of child language development. Bruce Schatz was very much involved in fly genetics, and so they had examples of data sharing and strategies for releasing data to the community. And so we put together this workshop to discuss these ideas of data sharing and data standardization. So believe it or not, this is still online. The Office of Naval Research doesn't let anything get lost, and so I pulled this down pretty readily from that. And so these are some of the issues that we discussed. I don't know if this is legible from where you are, but stereotactic coordinates, the Taylor-Ack atlases, those were still fairly radical. Choice of a development environment, the sociology of sharing, methodological standards, things like this. And then at the end, which I'll come back to, forming a society for human brain mapping. So this was a 5-day workshop, and so we started off with project background and history and status and the brain map software. We had people use our software, so we were doing basically like hackathons. Everybody that came used the software, gave feedback, we took notes, we made changes. But I think a big one is here, toward a philosophy of databasing and data sharing in the human brain mapping community. And basically the argument got made pretty forcibly that with standardized coordinates and whole brain voxel-wise analyses, we could generate data sets that would be useful basically forever, and that we ought to be aware of that and sharing them then. And so I guess the perpetual skeptic, Alan, who we know is very productive but very skeptical, was the moderator of a long-running session in which he guided us through many topics, two of which are particularly noteworthy. One was the discussion of the need for more workshops. We'd proposed to do this every 18 months or so, and what we got from the floor was, no, you're going to do it every year for a while. And we like December in San Antonio because the weather is great, and there's the Riverwalk, and there's a lot of fun things to do. So that's what happened, is we started having these meetings every December. And the other was creating a society for human brain mapping, and just to read from that, a motion was raised repeatedly that this group consider the formation of a society of human brain mapping. The idea had been raised in several other contexts. The suggestion was well received, but not manageable within the present workshop, so we came back to it the following year. And as a side note, this was well covered by the press, so this received a good write-up in Science, and one of the things that meant was that the workshop funding was easy to get again and again and again, and so these were pretty well-funded meetings, and I'll come back to that as well. So this makes it easier to know where we were. So that's the Alamo in the background, and if you note, Bruce Rosen and where's David Kennedy? He's in there. Rudiger's hiding in the background. That the people that put together the subsequent meetings, the Paris and Boston meetings, were there and planning. Alan, I think, came to every one of those meetings. Arthur Toga and John Mazziota, I think, came to every single one. So in '94, we were well on the way to planning the meeting for Paris, and a lot of the meeting planning at the strategy level came there, still in San Antonio. And one of the things that happened was that really all the lab leaders said, we'll come and we'll bring our people. And so Bernard and Rudiger and Per were guaranteed that they wouldn't lose money by doing this. As I recall, Bernard created a foundation and was on the hook for the money if it was money losing. So that was pretty bold. So did I miss one? So if you look at that original picture and see the people that then hosted meetings, just to show you that they did live up to their promise. Mazzieri, Seitz, and Rowland did the first one. Rosen, Kennedy, and Beliveau, the next one. Evans and Worsley, the one in '98. Jack and I did one in 2000. Carl Friston and Richard did the one in Brighton. Ryuta Kawashima, who was there from the start, did the one in Sendai. Balázs Gulyás also was there from the start and did OHBM in Budapest. Marcel Mejlem picked it up in Chicago. Jihan Go, the OHBM in Beijing. And so everyone was really true to their word in hosting meetings as local organizers. So we're missing, okay. So there was a slide in there I was expecting, but it's not there. But one of the other things that happened at this point, when we got to 2000, the meetings in San Antonio had been going on all the way through the December meetings through 1999, and steadily funded. And so what I did was I took that funding and put it in instead for OHBM. And so I stopped getting meeting grants for San Antonio and instead got 10 years of funding for OHBM, and that was the origin of the Trainee Travel Award. So that's an ongoing thing. So where that started was basically cashing in the goodwill from the San Antonio meetings and turning them into the Trainee Travel Award. And the missing slide was that Human Brain Mapping was the publisher of the meeting proceedings for the first meeting in Paris. And that went well, and so Wiley was convinced to fund the Wiley Young Investigator Award, and they funded that for the next 25 years. So both of those came out of the San Antonio relationships. And so I'll stop there and pass that on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. As we continue, there were other meetings as well. Brain Map was one of them, was the main one, and then also, oops, can I have the, oh yeah, here we go. And Karen Berman sent me a couple slides talking about the other precursor to OHBM, the brain meeting, and I don't know if you wanted to say a few words.
So this is a slide that was very important to me and my development and the development of the field. Another precursor, as Peter mentioned, was this meeting which went by many names, the International Society of Regional Blood Flow and Metabolism, Brain PET, and by this time it was Brain whatever year. And I wanted to show this picture of two giants upon whose shoulders we all work, and it's Seymour Ketty and Lou Sokolov, who I had the pleasure of getting to know at the NIMH. And Seymour, of course, was the inventor of one of the early ways of measuring cerebral blood flow, and Lou Sokolov was the inventor of the 2-deoxyglucose method for measuring cerebral metabolism. And on the next slide, I wanted to show a picture from Seymour and Carl Schmitt's paper from 1948, I believe it was, and this is the method that they used to measure cerebral blood flow. People were breathed nitrous oxide, and there was sampling from the jugular and also from the femoral artery. We'd have an awful hard time getting that through any of our IRBs today, but they used it for a number of purposes: to study schizophrenia, to study barbiturates, to study LSD, and schizophrenia. Again, things we would not be able to do today, but giants upon whom we have been privileged to walk these past years.
Okay, so now we're in the OHBM era. So just to give you a sort of graphical perspective and a list of all the meetings, we're going to, for this symposium at least, we focused on the first 10 or 11 years, but this is a sort of a depiction of every single place that OHBM has been, and you can see we've covered pretty evenly Europe, North America, a little bit of Asia, Australia. And so it's definitely an international organization, now society. And just to give you a perspective of the people who were, at least the main committee was council. I mean, of course, there was the program committee, the education committee, but these were the people on council who were, usually council consists of the elected, the chair-elect, and the chair, and then the past chair. But this, just listing the people, almost everyone here is on this list right here in the first 11 or so years. I'll keep on going here. So just to list off the names of the people that are here, at least that were slated to be here. So you can see I'm not going to go through all the details of every single person and what they did, but looks like, for instance, Bernard Mazier has been chair twice now, along with treasurer and co-organizer of the first meeting. A number of people have continued on, rotating off and on the council. Some people actually have not been on council but have been very influential. Bob Turner has been a constant influence at this meeting. And I don't have on here Bruce Rosen, who's here. So he's been, of course, a very active part of this meeting as well. So just to give you a perspective of all the people here have been very involved with organizing everything. And so for the first meeting, It's actually interesting. This first meeting was held in 1995. Bernard Mazier organized it, and I have to say for myself, one thing I regret, I was a postdoc at the time at Boston, and I think I was given the opportunity to go to this meeting, but I just felt like I was just too busy, and I just wanted to get stuff done. And I kind of regret that decision, because I didn't, back then you don't have that perspective that this is a first meeting of such a long string of significant meetings and what it became. But so I missed this first meeting, but I will have Bernard talk about the organization.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Peter. Thank you also for being there. I think it's just like all anniversary. It's a time to celebrate. I'll start just by reminding how this happened, because at this second San Antonio meeting, I was sitting in the back of the room, like I sit usually when I am at school, and they were in the front. Peter Fox and Per Roland was really arguing about having a larger meeting, and Per Roland actually stood up and he said, "We need a big city to do that." And then I started to just hide myself, and they say, "Paris seems like the right place to go." And so that was how Paris was chosen. Yesterday, Vince Calhoun mentioned a few things that were existing in 95 or not existing in 95, and in 95 we didn't have the web. So we had to organize everything from scratch, including finding money. But all over, I think that meeting was probably the best experience in management of science of my entire life. And I didn't have any electronic archives of the Paris meeting, so I really search and dig and go in all my paper archives and finally found them 2 days ago. So I will give you sort of little details about the Paris meeting right now. So it was held in this place. That's the Science and Industry Museum in Paris. We thought it was a good choice for this. And, oops. All right. So on this slide, you have two things. On the left side, you have the scientific committee, and you will recognize many of the people who are on the floor today, plus some others who didn't make it. I wanted to mention also, because we don't mention these people very often, that's on the right slide, is the local organizing committee. And when I say organizing, it's really the people who organize the meeting, the little hands doing everything from, printing, giving phone calls, trying to raise money. And we have one guy sitting here in the room, Laurent Petit, who is there, and who was actually the deputy secretary working for the Paris meeting organization. And all, these people were people from my lab, and actually they didn't get disgusted because 4 of them actually put a bid for the 2022 meeting. So they're back, and they tried to be back in Bordeaux. Now some numbers. In Paris we had 460 abstracts, and there was quite a selection. I mean, I went to these archives and found that we decided to keep only abstracts that reached 3 over 5 in the ranking system, so 12% were rejected, and 15% went in oral session, which was easier than these times. We had also 344 posters, so I made calculation that means given the 10 hours allotted time for poster, so each attendee had 2 minutes to see a poster if you wanted to see all posters. Now I did the same calculation for Roma, and it goes down to 200 milliseconds per poster. So, yeah. Attendees, that was a real surprise because we didn't expect that many people to show up. It was really gambling because we didn't have any previous figures, especially because that meeting was conceived at the beginning as a satellite of the Brain PET meeting, which is meeting held by the Society for Cerebral Blood Flow and Metabolism. And so we didn't expect that many attendees. And it was sort of split 50-50 between North America and Europe, with a very small contingency from Asia, mostly Japan. But already we had 20% of students, which was an interesting figure. Now, what about the budget? Budget was $200K for that meeting. And the interesting thing is that because we didn't have any money, we weren't even an organization at this time. So most of the money actually came from sponsors, and I want to acknowledge especially the European Union and the Directorate for General Research, which really pledged heavily on the budget, which was absolutely critical. And I just want, just for fun, okay, just the registration fees at that time was $80. So we have work to be done at the level of the society to try to lower a little bit. Now, this is another surprise. The topics that were actually were sort of, we designed the meeting to be mostly centered on cognition. We didn't want to reproduce a methodological meeting, but despite this, about a third of the abstracts were methods, and a big part also was clinical, and that is almost figures that we can find here in the meeting of the OHBM meetings for the years. But the most surprise came from the techniques. At the time of the Paris meeting, it was MEG and EEG who actually contributed most to the abstract, with PET and MR being about the same. So we always thought that HBM was grounded in PET studies, but at the first meeting, at least, people who showed up, they were really split between the three categories of techniques. Okay, that's just showing that show that in terms of organization, the meeting 25 years ago didn't look that different from the meeting today. The only difference is parallelization. So we have so many abstracts now that we run everything in parallel, and but you will find themes for the sessions that continue and that were carried over the different years. Two things I want to mention on this. We had sort of a pre-Talleyrand lecture, time before Talleyrand lecture, and we had two lecturers at this time. We had Jan Kaas, who talked about the brain maps, and we have Jean-Pierre Changeux, who is a neuroscientist working on neurotransmission, and both gave lectures. The other thing I want to mention is that we had a special session about brain mapping community, addressing the issue of having an organization or a society, and that session didn't turn totally well because we had to postpone to the Boston meeting the same discussion. And then we had the special ICBM session that was chaired by John Maziola. At this time, ICBM was sort of, I wouldn't say spin-off, but there was a project that also emanated from the brain map meeting. And now, I won't spend too much time on HBM 95 highlights because I don't have, this was a time where we were still using carousel and slide projector. Yeah, so many of you in the room may not know what a carousel is, but we do not have all this material. So. But anyway, Thursday afternoon I will include some of the abstracts in the highlight session because there weren't any highlight session for Paris. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention and enjoy for the rest.
Okay, and as was mentioned, also, Wiley and human brain mapping helped out. They along with neuroimage as well, that over the first several years they published the abstracts as special issues in their journals. That lasted for a while until it became completely out of control. So this video, really quickly, is a video that was given to me by Olaf Paulsen, and it was advertising the 1997 Copenhagen meeting. So if you could turn up the volume just a little bit.
Ladies and gentlemen and friends, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the third International Conference on Functional Mapping of the Human Brain.
Det er maj 1997, og 1200 internationale hjerneforskere samlet i København til kongres. Hjernens betydning for vores mentale aktiviteter har i århundreder været tema for filosofiske diskussioner. Men i de senere år er forskerne begyndt at blande sig. Med de nye billedscanningsmetoder har de fået adgang til den levende hjerne. De kan studere hjernens funktioner og de neurale processer, mens de foregår, og koblingen til de stadig stærkere computere gør det muligt at lave detaljerede billeder af aktiviteterne. Disse videnskabelige metoder er opstået inden for de sidste 25 år, og udviklingen har været præget af en række nytænkende personligheder.
Niels was really one of two persons who was dynamic and was inventing a new method for measurement of cerebral blood flow. I think you all know the method which they first introduced in cats using krypton.
De store fremskridt er blandt andet sket, fordi specialister på vidt forskellige områder har fundet hinanden i en ny dialog hen over faggrænserne. Læger, fysikere og computeringeniører deltager i disse år aktivt i tværfaglige diskussioner med alle områder af neurovidenskaben, og det syder og bobler af nye eksperimenter og undersøgelsesresultater om raske såvel som syge hjerner.
Du måler hvor lang tid tager det for dig at trykke på knappen, når du skal se det røde bogstav der, ikke?
First documentation of the alternative visual pathway. So we believe, and I think that's correct, that that's the first time this pathway has been directly functionally documented in humans. The alternative visual pathway. But do you think this pathway only develops in people who have damage?
Yes, I mean in Portugal there are illiterate people.
And what's interesting here is that
then you have the oxidation effect, maybe after 2 or 3 seconds. So it can be that you can find it.
Okay, you may have seen some familiar faces in that. Albert Getty and Mark Rakel was there, and Ian Law was one of the people there who was very active in PET. A lot of other people. Also, you might have noticed so in the Copenhagen meeting they had these program books that were very long that had all the sessions. It was really nicely organized. So before the Copenhagen meeting was the Boston meeting, and that was my first meeting, and I remember the education courses started about that meeting. Arno Wimminger, who's here, organized those on mostly optical imaging, but then it grew into what we have now over the years. Okay, let me just keep on going. So with the Copenhagen meeting, I have probably a pretty poignant memory. So this was my first meeting that I was actually helping out with. I was asked to be part of the program committee. It was I flew overseas and went to Copenhagen to sort of plan the meeting ahead of time. And Niels Lassen, who was also part of the program committee, he was actually dying of cancer, and but he really wanted to help out with the meeting at the time. So he was actually, I remember very distinctly, if you've been part of the program committee meeting, you sort of go over the abstracts and decide which are going to be talks and which are going to be posters. And I remember distinctly going to his hospital bed and discussing with him which abstracts are going to be talks or not, as far as the methods abstracts. And he died several months later before the meeting started. So he was a hugely influential person in the field, and he really helped out that third meeting. And I'll hand it off to Alan Evans to talk about not only the Montreal meeting, but the various controversies that have been discussed over the years.
Thank you, Peter. So, it's a little bit out of order because this helmet, it comes from the Boston meeting. And you will be perhaps a little bit surprised that when we were first coming into being as an organization, there was a very emotional debate about whether or not we should become a society. And some of our leaders felt viscerally that we should not become what they called a mutual admiration society. And we came to a meeting in Boston, a plenary meeting, about 1,500 people in the audience. And we knew that there was going to be a very strong debate on both sides of this issue. And I was given the suicide mission of moderating that particular discussion. So that afternoon I went out to the local Army and Navy stores and picked up this helmet. As you can see with Arthur there now, that was in Hamburg. And I put it under the podium, and said introductory remarks that I expect a lot of discussion about this, and I reached down and put the helmet on, and people burst out laughing, and I think that diffused the tension in the room right away, and we had a very pleasant discussion after that. And so I thought that was the end of that story, and I left the helmet on the floor. Dave Kennedy, when cleaning up after the Boston meeting, found it, took it home, and his wife was telling him to throw it out for 20 years, Dave. And eventually he recovered it and brought it to the Hamburg meeting and gave it back to me, and now I have it basically on my desk at home. So if I come to when we came to the Montreal meeting, and what I remember about the Montreal meeting, it was still very much a multimodal meeting, and I'm delighted to see that I think we're getting back to our roots a little and incorporating MEEG and PET back into the mix. I think it's essential that we retain our multimodal character. We had about 1,500 people, and as Bernard described, we did it all ourselves. There was no L&L, no organizing group at all. So myself, Thomas Paus, Alain Dagger, and Bruce Pike did all of the organizing. We invited Masao Ito as one of our keynote speakers. And the Talarak lecture, we invited Brenda Milner to give the Talarak lecture, essentially as a valedictory for all of her great work, and so much, and thanks for all the fish, and you can go and sit down now, Brenda. That was 21 years ago. Last year she celebrated her 100th birthday, and she's still coming into work. And I have, in fact, told her many times, Brenda, we're going to have to shoot you. And she says, well, many have tried. So that's an instructional longevity in our field. I think one of the things that we insisted upon at our meeting was that all posters are up all the time, and I still feel that strongly. It's terrible when you go to a meeting and you wanted to go see a poster and they say, well, that was on Tuesday, it's gone. So whenever we can, we should have all the posters all the time. We instituted, in the middle of the conference, something that was received very well by the younger crowd and not so well by the older people in our organizing group. We had a half day off because we felt that after 2.5 days of intense drinking from a fire hose, it was time to have some time off to recharge, and then come back on Thursday and Friday for a more full day. And I was beaten up by a few people who said, I came here for a scientific meeting. I didn't come here to have fun. And I think it's important that we retain that fun aspect of our meeting. What else? I'll get to you in a minute. To that end, it was the World Cup year, and we had one room set off to the side that had a giant screen for the World Cup, and Richard Frakowiak essentially spent 5 days in there. One of the things that how do I drive this forward? No, that's not me. One of the things that I did want to bring up at this meeting is the contribution of Keith Worsley. Yeah, there are slides, okay. Yeah. I did want to bring up the importance of Keith Worsley to our community. Keith died tragically in 2009 from cancer. There are an awful lot of people at this conference now who will not remember Keith, and I think it's important to record his seminal impact on the field. Keith was a mathematician statistician, who never knew one end of the brain from the other, but he had an incredible grasp of the mathematical underpinnings of what we are trying to achieve, the statistical analysis of both focal activation and connectivity analysis. And he would interact with Carl Friston. Carl, of course, is a psychiatrist and so understood the brain very well. Keith was a pure mathematician, and they had numerous interactions between them where Carl would write a paper and Keith would correct him by a factor of pi by 4, and then Carl would write a paper called fMRI Revisited, and then Keith would correct him again, and he'd write another paper called fMRI Revisited again. Well, we used to write consider this work together as 4 of us in a room, myself, Sean Marrett, Peter Nealon, and Keith Worsley, and we'd sit in an airless room called the bunker, no windows, and every week we would go through all of the issues of the day. We were writing papers, mostly written by front written by Keith. We thought those were pretty dense papers. What we didn't know that Keith was writing 60-page tracts for the Journal of the American Statistical Association, where essentially you could understand and, the, and but, and everything else was triple integrals. What we didn't know at the time that became more apparent is that Keith was solving the issues of signal detection in a correlated noise field, which were completely general in nature. These were exactly the same problems that the cosmologists were trying to deal with when trying to understand the universe through a telescope. These had the same issues of aperture function, noise correlation, and Keith had essentially solved their problem while he was dealing with our problem with signal activation in image data. And when he first presented his general solutions to the American Statistical Association, essentially he was mobbed by the cosmologists who tried to carry off their new king to their own field. And we spent 20 years trying to keep their hands off Keith's work. That's really all I want to say, is to make sure that Keith is recognized, and thank you very much. Oh, I should say, these are some pictures of Keith with another partner in crime, Pedro Valdez Sosa, and another partner in crime, and there's Keith. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to back up, and I will give the podium to Carl Zillis, who will talk a little bit about the soccer batch at the Dusseldorf meeting.
We have heard a lot about the development of scientific concepts in OHBM and the connection between brain mapping and cosmology. So I thought that it may be good to emphasize also social aspects of OHBM. During the Dusseldorf meeting, my memory reminds me of the soccer game and the soccer competition. So we had collected a number of young people playing soccer, and you see here faces of many of people who are still members of OHBM and visiting the Congress, who were members of the Dusseldorf team, and we found a good opposing team in the final game. It was the FIL team, and you see Richard Verkowiak and me completely exhausted by playing the fair referees. The members of the teams were not very much agreeing with my statement of fair referees, but we did our best to help our teams, and at the end I can tell you this was definitely not water in the bottles, so we have some recreation. And there was another very nice story from the Dusseldorf time. We had a rock and roll band in the evening, and a lot of people were running to this event, and also Arthur Toga was there, but as normally he came a bit late, so he was in the background. And meanwhile the rock and roll band was really hot, and they removed their shirts, and othermost jumping up and down to see what's going on in front. And he asked me, did they already put off their pants? So this was the Düsseldorf meeting on which we had big discussions about PET and fMRI and MRI on human brain mapping, and I think it was the last meeting on which PET played a major role by many talks and by many posters. Later on, MRI came more in front, and nowadays we see a revival of electrophysiology. So OHBM is really a living organism developing step by step based on one or the other methods. Thank you.
Let's see if there's the award. Okay, so Bob Turner, as I mentioned, has always been sort of a presence at these meetings, and he's contributed fundamental contributions to bold contrasts, and he's always been a presence asking questions. Everyone who's given a talk at Methods has a Bob Turner experience with questions. And Bob, I welcome you to talk about a little bit of your science.
I put this in because it was a presentation, I think it was a 2002 meeting, in which I showed no MRI images whatever, and I put it into the human brain mapping meeting because I knew that it would be acceptable there rather than ISMRM, where you had to have an image somewhere, or at least a spectrum. But this was really the question, as Carl was saying, the question that arose really when people started using fMRI in the late 1990s for serious brain mapping, and that was the question of draining veins and just how localized MRI was, and functional MRI was, and so this was work which drew on the wonderful brain atlas of Duvernois, in which at the back of his brain atlas he had these lovely photos of the surface vasculature of the brain, and I took advantage of these of these pictures to actually just do some measurements on the photographs themselves, and I come up with estimates of just how bad the draining vein problem actually was. So that was a single author paper, and it has now been cited hundreds of times. I'm just very proud of the fact that I could just get this from measuring a photograph in a book. But the other thing I wanted to share with you is something that actually goes back to the very beginning, long before OHBM was even thought of, and this goes back to the summer of 1991, the summer in which Ken Kwong made the first measurements of changes in deoxygenation in the human brain caused by visual stimulation. And this is something I wrote when I was on holiday on the Outer Banks in the fall of 1991, remembering my own experience in the magnet at MGH, the Advanced NMR Systems magnet at MGH, in which these first measurements were made with echoplanar imaging. Here by the lighthouse, no hurricane today. The steady, gentle rain pools in the road, giving my inner vision open play, remembering when the photic of goggles glowed. Remembered light, the replay of my brain beyond surprise, beyond imagination, showed such secret changes, strangely clear and plain, lit by the paths in which my brain's blood flowed. Light breaks where no sun shines. My mind is known, is public in this simple act. Marina's lighthouse penetrates the rind of my tough skull. Thought is become a fact. I see my seeing now, beside the sea whose waves still break and thunder inside me. So that's my memory of the discovery, which has been, of course, incredibly productive and is now the mainstay of this society of thousands of people and generations of younger scientists. So I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pat. Okay. All right. So just a few more pictures that were given to me from some of the members. Some of you might want to speak up. This is from the more recent Hamburg meeting. I think all of us have memories like this where, it's either grabbing a beer afterwards or grabbing some lunch or the various parties. This is Carl Zillis. I don't know if we actually offered an Oscar, but I don't know the context of this. Yeah, Alan.
So this was at one of the other meetings of this kind that was being held, organized by Carl and Katrin, the Vote Symposium meetings, and it was Carl's 65th birthday. And I'd worked really hard to find what I thought was an appropriate gift for Carl, music, Welsh music, I'm sorry, and a book, and I'd really thought hard about it. And we got to the meeting, and Toga and Maziara hadn't thought about anything to get for Carl. I said, "You got to get Carl something." So they took themselves off to Cologne that afternoon and found a store with an Oscar in it. And of course, this is the only thing anybody remembered about that gift.
Great. All right. Okay. So you might want to talk a little about this as well.
This, I think it speaks for itself.
Yeah.
We would do the educational courses for years together, and this issue would always come up where Carl would always say, "This is not really measuring cortical thickness, this is an MRI-based cortical thickness." And if I said, if we call it MRI-based cortical thickness, is that sufficient? Yes. So we would have a long discussion, which essentially was just semantics. Yeah. And that's what happens when you let a neuroanatomist loose in a brain imaging field. Next slide. And of course, this is the eternal response from Carl.
And then, and then, of course, the progress that's been made as far as that's concerned. Okay, and then Karen mentioning I think this was outside. I don't even know which meeting. This is at Geneva. Okay.
Yes. So I think this picture sort of speaks for itself, except to note I wasn't really smoking the cigar, but I did not inhale.
Not inhaling either.
But I am very grateful to Pedro, who couldn't be at this meeting, for bringing them, and we all had a wonderful time.
Okay. And just to mention a little bit, of course, OHBM has always been about, at least from my perspective, there's been a certain amount of stability, but also it's always been trying to reinvent itself. It started out on its own, and then about the Brighton meeting, we decided upon a meeting company, L&L, which took over and really helped things stay organized, and it kept the institutional knowledge. As it progressed, there have been debates about whether to call ourselves an organization or society, and I think it's been won finally by society, even though we're still called Organization of Human Brain Mapping. So that's an interesting compromise. At the same time, there's been debates about parallel sessions versus single sessions. And I think in Copenhagen was the first time where there was some compromise, where we said, okay, let's have poster sessions during some of the oral sessions, and that's kind of parallel. And then, of course, just out of necessity, because it's grown so much, we had to have parallel sessions. And I think we first put parallel sessions in the morning, educational sessions for a while, and then finally, the meeting itself had to have parallel sessions. Except now we're still, I think the symposia and of course the keynotes are not parallel, which is still, I think, a good thing. So there's some stability as far as that's concerned. And we've also expanded tremendously. We have, innovations like brain art with the Neuro Bureau. There's brain hacks. There's also the various awards, Glass Brain Award, the Reproducibility Award, the Education Award, along with the Wiley Young Investigator Award, and also the Best Paper Awards that were given. This happens to be one that Susan gave me. Susan won the Glass Brain Award last year, and I think it's also sort of representative of an increased awareness and of wanting more diversity, more inclusivity in the meeting itself, and I think that in the last couple of years that's really been pushed, and I think we're sort of leading the way in many ways in terms of doing that sort of thing. Okay, just before we go into our question and answer period, and feel free, the audience, to ask questions as well. Anything you want. But just to start it out, so Richard Pikoviak couldn't make it, Marcel and Carl Friston couldn't make it either to this meeting, but these are the emails that they sent me. So basically, Richard remembers that his contributions were, the PHIL commitment, functional imaging laboratory commitment, the link to NeuroImage in terms of helping to publish the abstracts, drafting of the statutes with Mark Rakel, and also, of course, the battle of organization. So Richard is kind of as anyone who knows him, he's sort of an anarchist. He likes things as bottom up as possible, wanted to keep it an organization. It's sort of kept an organization, but then, and now it's finally grown into society. Marcel wrote me this email that I'm reading a book called Oregon Trail. It's about the pioneers who made the first transcontinental journey. For some strange reason, the book reminded me of the initial OHBM years. There were the beginning in Boston, debates between the fractions who wanted society and who preferred a king. Brighton, where the current rules of council were established by the decision made to hire an L&L. Sendai, that may have been cut off, but Chicago, where a party was a party boat was picked us up from the wharf of the hotel. And then Carl Friston also remembers, as was sort of indicated by Peter, there was, most of brain mapping was driven by PET. A little bit of MEG and EEG. But about the time of Copenhagen was the time, actually Copenhagen also was a time when we first had our name of Organization for Human Brain Mapping, and that was a phase transition between PET and fMRI. So fMRI started to become much more transcendent and much more dominant, and I think even fMRI at some point in time, about maybe 8 years ago, is sort of almost diversified into being mostly resting state fMRI, and I think that's sort of waning, and now it's taking on a life of its own in other aspects. So those are some of the contributions, or at least some of the thoughts by the people who couldn't be here. And so I just have this slide up for all the people here, including Bruce Rosen, that just feel free to contribute any sort of thoughts that you have. So, for instance, which one is your most memorable OHBM, and why? You can answer any one of these questions. What's your most distinct OHBM memory?
say anything bad. Is this on? Yes.
Yep.
So, in spite of the extraordinary science that you've heard about and the kind of history that is well represented by these slides and all the findings that are presented at these meetings, I think for me, one of the intangibles, perhaps more important things, is to establish the friendships. So the social aspects, getting to meet people that may live far away from you, that you don't see very often, is really perhaps one of the most rewarding things. And that's the case when this meeting was originated at Peter Fox's meeting. One of the late nights that occurred in San Antonio, this won't be risque, I promise, but one of the very late nights included some rather heavy drinking amongst some of the people you see on this list right here. And Frakowiak was lamenting the fact that the main meeting that people went to in terms of brain mapping was the cerebral blood flow and metabolism meetings, the CBF&M meetings. And he was saying that the problem here is they're really only focused on rat strangling. And we're not rat stranglers. We need to find a new venue. And so at that point, with the majority of the table being as deeply inebriated as we were, I think that's when Bernard said, well, we'll just have the thing in Paris. And that would be the origins of this meeting. And so I think the point of this little description is that getting together with friends and having well-lubricated conversations is an important aspect of this meeting. And I hope those of you that are newbies at this meeting or younger than all the fossils that are up here on the stage will learn to appreciate that these friendships last a long time and that the science you exchange is only part of the equation. So I encourage you to make the best of your mutual visits.
I just wanted to echo what Art just said about the friendships, and the most memorable meeting for me was the Paris meeting, because it brought together a whole bunch of people who had no idea what they were doing at the time, but were wanting to try and make a go of it. And my abstract, just to mention the topics that Bernard mentioned already, my abstract was a dual abstract. It was intracranial EEG and fMRI. So I don't know which side of the fence that will sit in when in the categorization. But the other thing I want to mention is that all of the people that you see here on the stage were back then leaders in their day. Peter and I were the younger ones. I was a postdoc at the time. I'm very grateful for the relationships that I've established with these people here on the stage and with others who aren't here. And these are friendships that transcend science. They involve social activities. I remember being dragged by Jim Haxby with his lab to a concert at the Sainte-Chapelle by candlelight. It was a chamber music orchestra concert. It was very, very memorable. So they're the kinds of things that you remember and you value, and these people are still friends for life. The other thing I remember about that Paris meeting was I got my wallet stolen, and I was locked in the metro with the thief, and I got it back. Yes, and I'll tell you about that over a beer if you want to know a bit more about that. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, because I'm a bit younger, and that's not meaning to be disrespectful to anyone on the stage here, I feel that I'm a bridge between these folks and the people who are coming up through the system now, and it's great to pay it forward and help younger people and encourage them and do whatever I can to mentor them. So that's what the meeting means for me.
One thing I was going to say too. So your memory actually just made me remember one person that we forgot who passed away is Jack Bellevaux. So the Boston meeting, he was one of the co-organizers of the meeting, and he was actually the person who wrote the first paper on functional MRI before Bold came along. And if anyone knew Jack, he was extremely passionate, extremely just energetic and unique in his own way. And I remember also in terms of at the elections at Boston, electing for council, there was no online sort of thing. It was basically people writing in votes at the door. And then I remember distinctly, Jack Kennedy and David Kennedy and Jack, frantically counting up the votes in their hotel room before the town hall meeting. And I don't know if Bruce has anything to say about, or David.
In preparing for this, Bruce did mention that we should go through the archives of things that all tend to be in my house next to the helmet I finally gave back to Alan. I did discover a lovely shirt that I'm proud to wear, and I also discovered a copy of the original ballot that posed the binding propositions, to the organization in terms of should we be an organization, what type of scope of activity should we take on, something about journal affiliations, and what type of things should membership entail, and then a very long and exquisite list of potential people for the board of officers. And so it was just kind of fun to identify this and in that sense, and then to really reiterate again that Jack and Jack's work in pushing us in our areas, in this areas, and also have to tell the anecdote, of course, that Jack couldn't have done his experiments without Peter Fox's goggles. The same goggles that went into the original PET work for visual simulation were the same goggles that were used in the original functional MRI work, both Ken's, Kwong's, and Jack Beliveau's. So that was already, the collegiality and the working together, to put these things together was great.
Can I add something about the Boston meeting? It was actually the first I attended. I was unfortunately not in the Paris meeting like Peter. And I remember vividly and still have the teaching books from Boston, which I think were brilliant, because when I came back, I gave this all to my students, say, here, you learn about events related, all these things were there already in kind of preliminary form. You couldn't find it. There was, as we heard before, no internet at that time. It was much more difficult to get information. And the Boston Bible, we called it in my lab, we still have still a flattered, kind of heavily used version of that one as a memory of that meeting.
If I can chime in and continue on the importance of the Boston meeting. So I fondly remember my role starting with attending Peter's brain map meetings, and then as many of us came back from the Paris meeting and said, okay, the sentiments of the group was let's have this continued indefinitely, and we had to figure out how to bootstrap from a spirit and a willingness to what do we actually do to make it happen. And I remember at that December '95 meeting, a group of us essentially ad hoc said, okay, we're going to roll up our sleeves and generate an agenda for the Boston meeting. And then we had to go from an ad hoc process and the event that that Alan so famously chaired with his helmet to a process that established a council and the voting process that David described. And so I was thrilled to become a member of that council and be asked to serve as the first chair, and then to help see the society go on from here. So that was ancient history. Then in terms of modern history, I was reminded yesterday by just a half dozen chance conversations of the joy of the meeting to me is the conversations that wouldn't take place even on the web without the personal interactions of young people coming up and starting a conversation that is mutually beneficial. The other thing that I was reminded of kind of relates to Danny Bassett's description of busybodies versus hunters versus my own style for navigating posters when I come to the OHBM meeting is I refuse to spend time in advance saying, okay, what posters am I going to see because these people's labs I know. I like the random walk approach and just wander around, and every time I find multiple posters that strike up conversations, and I learn something that I wouldn't have if I hadn't had that willingness to explore the environment. So,
just to interject with the posters, I had the experience of going to ISMRAM. ISMRAM is another meeting that has that has been ongoing, and not to criticize ISMRAM, but they decided to switch to all electronic posters in such a way that you couldn't actually get the gist of the posters. And I hope that we figure out a way to somehow never do that. I mean, maybe we can have electronic, but keep them up and keep them all available, because I think the poster sessions, as you mentioned, are some of the most important times to interact with everyone, and it really makes it's the heart and soul of the meeting. And I think actually you're right. I mean, I think after coming to the meeting over like the course of maybe about 5 to 7 years, everyone kind of ends up knowing everyone else in some way, and some better than others. And so it's really become a close-knit, nice community, and in a big part because of the poster interactions.
So I just wanted to mention a couple of things, particularly starting with the posters. I can't remember who it was, but it used to be in the very early days, their posters were up quite early, and someone, it might have been Reiner, would take some of the young students around to the posters and point out which poster was the best and which poster was very unique. And a crowd would soon follow, and it was a very educational experience. That evolved into the 7 a.m. educational workshops. And I feel that my primary contribution as a member of the society and as a leader was starting in Budapest, when I insisted that they start at 8 rather than 7 a.m.
I guess one of my favorite things about this meeting, so we joked online a little bit that we are up here all dinosaurs, but the youth and energy of this meeting, the students, are really what is one of my favorite parts.
Well, speaking of youth and energy, it's actually, just to interject really quickly again, I remember Brighton. Brighton, one of my most poignant memories from Brighton was almost going the whole week without any sleep, pretty much. I was running the education sessions, and back then the chair of the education committee was pretty much that person, and that was the committee, and I sort of organized the morning sessions and chaired them, every single one in the morning, starting at 7 in the morning. And you know, with Brighton, I was young, and so you're out kind of late, and then I don't do that anymore as much. But yeah, it takes a lot of energy as far as that's concerned. So, any other thoughts? Okay.
Maybe a short fun memory. And I remember well the meeting in Melbourne, which I was lucky to chair. And I remember the opening speech I said, and I saw that some people didn't like it, some liked it a lot. I said, you know, as often at HBM, we have in parallel running the World Championship, football, soccer, right? And I said, it's beautiful that now with the time shift, all the games you can watch overnight and can come at 8 after the last game at 7 directly to the meeting. And actually, I was one of the few who did that each day. So I remember flying back home 20 hours, kind of dead. But it was fun. Maybe less fun than playing like in Düsseldorf, but it was still fun to have soccer somehow around HBM all the time. Now it's actually the female championship, just not to forget that.
On the theme of the youth of this discipline, imaging neuroscience discipline, that has always been a very striking thing for me. I'm probably older than many of the people actually out here, but it's really energized this to a tremendous extent. But particularly, it's meant that the parties, the final evening of the meeting parties that this organization has put on for more than 20 years, have always been fantastically good parties. And I can particularly single out the party in San Antonio in year 2000 and the party in Brighton in 2001, where Adrian Owen and his band played as a warm-up group for the Bootleg Beatles. And that kind of very cheerful energy has been tremendously a tremendous catalyst for really good science over the years, and I hope this tradition will keep going in that sort of open and fresh and spirited way that it always has.
So I don't know if there's any questions from the audience, any comments from the audience, any memories from the audience, anything that's, oh yeah, okay. Does that microphone work? Can someone turn on that microphone?
Okay,
oh, there we go.
Great. Thanks. It's been kind of fun to hear all the reflections. For some of the, I don't know how many young people are here, but I wonder if you can explain and reflect about the nuance and the difference between an organization and a society, and then what that means now going forward since you're now a society.
Peter, there you go.
So, is that on? Yeah, so I think, at least from my recollection and perspectives, the biggest issue was to what degree the group was going to organize a meeting on an annual basis and wash its hands of any other responsibilities, or was it going to try and promote the growth of the community? Was it going to try and promote open science? Was it going to try and promote data standardization? And that was the issue. And one of the concerns was that if it was a society, it might step on the toes of existing societies, particularly clinical groups. And so we didn't want to get in anybody's face. I thought we should be a society. Other people thought organization. But I do think that what's happened, what has creeped into the meeting over decades and now is just very overt, is that we do need to care about things like data standards, setting up outreach, trying to bring this kind of science to disseminate it more broadly, to have educational outreach. And so we've become a society, even though there were people opposing it at the beginning, that it just happened naturally.
Just to continue on from Peter's point, data standards, OHBM has been very, very active about that relative to the Cobitus standard for MRI, which is out, and very wonderful committee chaired by Tom Nichols. That paper was published in Nature Neuroscience in 2017, Guidelines for Best Practices for Data Sharing, as well as data acquisition, and of course data analysis. And recently we've completed a second Cobitus document dealing with magnetoencephalography and electroencephalography, and that's a committee that I co-chaired with the very capable Cyril Pernay. And Cyril is the first author on that preprint that we've already got on the Open Science Framework. It's on the second version, and Council is going to review it now, and then we'll see whether we can get that published. But that's taken 2 years of work. So there's a lot of commitment by the membership of the organisation, not just at the leadership level, but at the grassroots level for these kinds of initiatives. And I think that's where we could really play a role. And the journal editors are very interested in this as well.
Yeah, just put it in simple words. Organization is a structure, and a society, that's people.
Okay, maybe the last part, just some added thoughts. I don't know if anyone has anything to share on the last few questions, the future. What are the next methods? What are the next advances? One thing that's been really wonderful about OHBM is that it's been just the right combination of being sort of grounded in the methods, but integrated very much with clinical questions and basic neuroscience questions. And so it's always seemed to sort of maintain that really nice balance that sort of helped push our understanding and push our methodology. So because you can't have methodology advancement really without having relevant things to apply it to, and you need those questions to always be there as well. So what do we need? Where are we going? How will we grow? I think that as far as the numbers are concerned, I remember the Florence meeting, actually. That was a huge bump in attendance. There was over 3,000 people at the Florence meeting in 2005, and that was an incredible meeting. It was really wonderful atmosphere, and Pietro actually put that one on as well. But since then, the numbers of people have been about 3,000. Maybe it's growing a little bit. I don't know if that's just simply the number of groups who have funding to do brain mapping research, but it's been steadily growing. Maybe it's approaching 4,000 in somewhat sense, but it's been sort of plateauing off. That might be a good thing? It might be not so good? I'm not sure. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts about the future, future needs, future demographics, future anything.
I'm not sure about that, but after this meeting is over 4,000 people already this year, and so I think that as long as we go to Italy every 10 years, we'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's if we want to boost in our numbers, we just come to Italy and keep it going. Okay, so unless anyone else has anything to say, I think it's really wonderful to have all these people who have been so integral to OHBM here up on stage sharing their thoughts and giving some perspective. And it's our hope that the future belongs to all the young people to become engaged and become involved. There's so many more committees. There's a lot to do, and definitely we encourage that. And so thank all of you, and thanks for attending.